Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for being here today. Today we are doing a really fun request video. So this is just basically a video talking about my experiences, how I aligned myself to kind of my soul's path, to the journey that I'm on now, to making such big shifts and leaps into where I'm at now, because my life is kind of a 180 of where I was born. So let's just get into the video. Nothing super crazy this time, but since we've got a couple questions about this, I figured we'll just jump straight in, and I hope you guys enjoy. I moved so far away from my birth country, like how is that something that still feels in alignment, to my soul or to my path and all of that kind of stuff. And so funny enough, I always joked with my mom growing up. So if you don't know, I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago. And basically that is the antithesis of what is probably the best for my body. Like my body really enjoys warmer climates with a lot of sun, beach weather, all of that kind of stuff. So I always joked with my mom growing up that I'd be very happy just living in a shack on a beach. And then lo and behold, the name of the place that I met my twin flame in was actually named Coffee Shack here in South Africa. So kind of funny little synchronicity there, just a small one, but essentially I always knew that I probably wasn't going to live in Chicago, and that was actually one of the main things that came up between me and my karmic, is because my karmic always called that place his home and always kind of would travel around, but knew that that was going to be where he wanted to be for the rest of his life. Whereas myself, I didn't feel super tied to being necessarily in the United States. I thought maybe I would be somewhere in Costa Rica, Puerto Rico, something like that, very beachy vibes, but still, close to home, like maybe Mexico, something like that was what I had envisioned in my mind, somewhere on a beach. Now, how I got to this point was quite a ride, and if you're on a twin flame journey, you also know that it is quite a ride. And the prep work to being here now started years and years and years before I even met my twin. So when I think back to my entire journey, I was a hairstylist in Chicago, right? So I was living a very traditional life. I grew up, went to school, went to college, which was my beauty school, but I lived there like you would at a college. Came out, started working right away, and acquired a lot of money in a very short amount of time. So this is what helped me to be able to do the things that I was doing after that. So then, as we all know, COVID came in, and I took some time off doing hair. That's when I met my karmic partner. That's when I began to travel. So I had this whole evolution. And within that evolution, when I was a hairstylist, I had owned a house with a previous partner. So I'd owned a house and, had all of those types of things. Had the house, had the car, had the perfect job, had the life that seemed on the outside very perfect. But I always felt like there was still something missing. And that was, a deeper meaning to life, or a deeper spiritual path. And that's when I began meditating really consistently. That's when I started my journey with what I would call my own version of minimalism. I started selling a lot of things. I noticed that I had way too many clothes, way too many shoes, just so many things that I felt were taking up my mental space, and my mental, capacity was so much stuff. And then as I began to, kind of go down this spiritual path, was when I really started to realize oh, I don't actually need that much to live a happy life. Living a happy life is more about being than it is about having, right? And yes, we need money, right? We need money to eat. We need money to trade for other goods and services. We need that as a medium at this point in time. But I was starting to realize it wasn't the end all be all, right? I had more money than I even knew what to do with, and I was still not feeling fulfilled. And so part of me was okay, what else is there for me in this life? And at this point, I'd only done a few big traveling trips, and most of them were to Europe, Mexico, the Caribbean islands, places like that. So your traditional kind of vacation spots. And I knew I wanted to do more traveling. I knew that was something that I found super exciting. I really liked that aspect of getting out of my comfort zone. And so when I met my karmic partner, he was somebody who had done extensive traveling, had really gone around the entire world. He was very well traveled. He was also a spiritual mentor. So in my eyes, I was like, wow, this person is like built for the exact lifestyle I want to live. And on the outside, he was like A to Z perfect for, I want to be more spiritual. I want to travel more. I want to have a more free lifestyle, not live the complete like normal 9 to 5. The thing that I was missing in that relationship was the heart activation, right? And the heart opening, and actually like living from that place of integrity and that place of spiritual knowledge. Like this person had so much spiritual knowledge, but didn't actually make choices and decisions in their lives from that place. And so that's where, I had to learn a lot of discernment within this relationship, and it caused me a lot of pain and a lot of heartache. But that was what I needed in order to lead me to where I am now, which is living in South Africa with my twin flame. So getting into how I got here. So if you guys don't know and you haven't already watched my story, I'll link it up here, and you can watch a little bit more information on my backstory, how I got here, how I met my twin flame. But essentially, I was still traveling South Africa. I was doing a Cape to Cairo camping trip. So we were traveling up the coast, or like up the continent of Africa, and had gone to multiple different countries at this time. And so I was living out of one bag. Like that's all I had. That's all I had been living out of for probably like maybe a year or so, because I was also camping and traveling before this trip. So living here in South Africa in this way, like my whole evolution up to this point prepared me for it. And so I think a lot of times on the twin flame journey, people will think like, I am so far from my dream life, when in reality, your life right now is actually just preparing you for that dream life. So there is going to be elements of your past within your future, because that's how they get woven together, right? So if you feel like you're really far away from where you'd like to be, just know that what you're moving through now is actually preparing you for that. And it will actually still have relevance. Maybe not everything, but most things. So now moving into, my life here. When I met my twin flame, I was in another relationship. So within our separation phase, which was about 6 months, I had to break up with my karmic, heal all of those wounds. I started my YouTube channel, and I moved back home, lived with my dad for those months, and then was trying to figure out, what am I going to do with my life, right? So I had quit being a hairstylist at that point. I had cleared up the karmic cycles, karmic baggage from my karmic relationship. We had all kinds of stuff tied together, so I had to move my stuff out of storage that we had together while we were traveling, like all of these things, right? Basically had to close out all of those cycles and those ties. And then I was not working. So you guys, you have to understand that a lot of times my separation phase seems really short to a lot of people. That's because I was not working. I was spending all day on my spiritual practices and healing these wounds. So that was able to catalyze my journey a lot quicker than other people would have been able to, handle or deal with if you have kids, or if you're in a marriage, or if you have a house together, if you have a dog together, if you are working, like things like that can really cause the process to take a lot longer, which isn't a bad thing. It just, those are things that needed to be tended to before going into your twin flame relationship. And so for me, I was spending all of my time on my YouTube channel, figuring out what I want to do with my life. And I remember saying to myself, I was like, I will not be chasing any more boys around the world, because that's what I felt like I had done with my karmic partner. I was like, I was not planning at all, you guys, to come back here to South Africa. It was not on my list. I was like, this boy can meet me somewhere. I'll meet him in Mexico. I'll meet him somewhere else. And then when I really started to think about it, you guys, it was because I was really afraid. I was afraid to put it all out there on the line for somebody again, because when I had done that in the past, it really kind of blew up in my face. And so the lesson here for me was to trust to have a lot of trust in myself that I'm making the right decisions, that I'm seeing this person clearly, that I can go there and get myself back home if I need to. But I knew I was in a stuck point, right? We got to a point in separation where I was like, if I don't make this leap to go out to see him, he didn't have the financial means at that point to be able to come out to see me. So I knew if I wasn't the one to make the leap to go do that, that it wasn't going to happen. So I was in a holding pattern until I made that decision, or like we made it together for me to go out there, right? But I had to really humble myself because I was like very dead set on the fact that like I wasn't going to go do that again. I wasn't going to go all the way across the world again for a boy, right? And so I had to really look at why I wasn't willing to do that, what I was afraid of, what I was concerned about, and where I could make those changes within myself to show myself that I'm actually safe and that it's not actually doesn't have to do with anybody else outside of myself. It just has to do with me. So that was a big part for me on my journey. Now, moving here, there was absolutely pros and cons to it, right? There was a lot of things I had to learn and a lot of bumps that occurred along the way. So, I had to learn how to drive manual, because manual is a very popular way of driving here. So James actually taught me how to drive manual. I also had to learn, new currencies. I haven't learned any new languages yet, but I know some phrases. So there's a lot of cultural differences, a lot of differences in the way things are done, a lot of differences in the way, relationships work between men and women, all of those kinds of things. Not to mention there was tons of things that hoops that we had to jump through in terms of, I still don't have a bank account here in South Africa because my spousal visa is still pending. So a lot of like the things that have to do with like logistics and government, like those are things that were big challenges for us and that I really had to adapt to. And this was a big learning lesson for me to really trust the timing of things, because being from the United States, you're used to like submitting something and like hearing back right away, where this was very different. It was like we had to call them 6 or 7 times every single week in order to like move our stuff forward. So it was a big lesson in divine timing, but also commitment, and just saying like, no, this is something I really want, so I'm also going to work for it and I'm not going to give up. Now, I'm not going to push it more than necessary, but I'm also not going to give up, right? And so moving here was a lot of big lessons. But I also had to ask myself, so James and I took a trip in the December, so I had came here in May, and then that December we had taken a trip with my mom down the west coast of the United States and then through Mexico. And so one of the things I was fearing on that trip was that like I was going to want to move back home, or I was going to want to move to Mexico, or like I was going to want to be somewhere other than South Africa. And so I was actually really nervous to go on this trip. And then when we came back to South Africa, I remember a moment very, very clearly where I was sitting by myself in a coffee shop, like the first day or the second day we'd gotten back. James was at work, and I was sitting by myself in a coffee shop, and I was just feeling such a resonance of home here. Like out of all the places in the entire world, because I'd done a lot of traveling up to this point, but out of all the places in the world that I could have ever been in, like this one pinpoint on the map is that place where I felt like I was home. And I do think some of that has to do with the fact that this is James's home. He's so familiar with this place. He grew up here. He spent, 27, 28 years of his life here. And so that, because of the connection that he and I have, that actually, makes me feel more comfortable, if that makes sense. So while yes, there was a lot of big shifts that had to happen in order for me to get here, and too many to even recount in one video, but this was such a process, and it was such a also beautiful process, you know, like this is the lifestyle I wanted to live for a long time. Even when I was back in the United States, I was looking up how to compost, how to garden, how to juice, how to make my own things, and now I'm living on a farm where we do all of those things. You know, composting is a way of life. It's like, why would you, now when we go anywhere else and I'm throwing my organic materials in the trash, I'm like cringing about it, you know. And this is not to judge anybody else or shame anybody else, but this is just like, you know, these are ways of lives that are so natural to us at this point, that it's like it makes so much sense that this is where I ended up, and that these were the resources available to me. And I think you'll also find that if you're on the twin flame journey and your twin lives in a different country, and maybe you're the one that needs to go there, or you know, something like that, you'll also find that there's a reason why your soul is going to resonate with that place or with the lifestyle of that place. It's not just because, you know, it's scary and you have to sacrifice yourself. It's not like that at all. It's actually because that's the best place for you to even be, and that's the place most aligned with how you want to live your life. So that's something to also keep in mind if you're in the same situation, or you're debating being in that situation. There are a lot of us on this earth that chose to come in and grow up in places that didn't feel like home, so that we could actually find and make our own homes somewhere else. And that's a beautiful thing to participate in. So I hope this video answered some questions about how to kind of realign yourself, and how I realigned myself to make these big leaps and changes within my life. And if you have any questions, please put them down below, and we will see you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Big love, Serena.